As the MLB postseason has rolled along, it has been very noticeable how many former Cardinals are making impacts for teams around the league. Now that we're in the League Championship Series round, I decided to take full stock and come up with the best roster of former Cardinals in the postseason that I possibly could. Just how good could this fantasy team be? What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you here on Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. I am excited about the exercise we'll be doing on the podcast today. I combed through all of the postseason rosters from the teams that made it and tried to come up with the best possible roster and lineup that I could of former Cardinals, because we have seen it all throughout this October. A number of former Cardinals making impacts on various teams around the league. It might be one of those situations where some of the names that we bring up, you go, oh man, I can't believe the Cardinals let that guy go. But there's also a lot of other ones that you maybe weren't even thinking about. You don't view as ones that got away per se, but they've really made nice careers for themselves and are putting themselves into position to contribute to winning teams this October. So I thought it would be kind of a fun exercise as we still kind of sit here waiting for more Cardinals news to come down the line later on in October. Maybe as we get into November, that's really going to pick up hot and heavy. So make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel for Cardinals content all off-season long. But for now, I thought this would be a fun little exercise to get into. You'll be surprised at how close we come to putting together a full 26-man roster of former Cardinals on MLB postseason teams. Before we get into that, though, I want to mention that I'm proud to be partnering with Underdog Fantasy, my favorite place to play fantasy games. You got to check out Pick'em. Easy to play by picking 2 to 8 stats of your favorite players and choosing whether they'll go higher or lower on those stats on any sport, from baseball to football to college football to hockey kicking up and the NBA just around the corner. You want to be on Underdog Fantasy playing their Pick'em game. If it sounds like fun, sign up with promo code b-schaeff to claim your free pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. I truly cannot wait to see your entries. Must be 18 or older to play and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. And again, that's promo code b-schaeff. Just sign up with the link in the description to this video. Check that down below and get on Underdog Fantasy. It's a lot of fun. Okay, let's dive right in. I'll pull my document up here where I have listed the roster made up of former Cardinals on MLB postseason teams. I'm going to start with players that are actually on postseason rosters, but then I will expand it a little bit beyond that and include some players from these postseason teams that just are not participatory in the postseason, and explain some of the stories of maybe some forgotten names that you guys might remember after we get into it a little bit here. I had a lot of fun putting this together and was surprised with just how many names I was able to track down. But let's start with basically going around the diamond. I want to start in the outfield, though, because that is where there are the most prominent, I would say, former Cardinals in terms of a position group that really does stand out with some of the contributions that former Cardinal outfielders have been making to this postseason. Should not really come as a surprise to anybody, given how often we talk about the ones that got away in the Cardinal outfield, but pretty interesting. I went back and forth on where to position some of these guys, but I decided I think I'm going to go with Lane Thomas in left field. He is an outfielder for the Cleveland Guardians, who right now are trailing the New York Yankees 2-0 in the American League Championship Series. Lane Thomas, though, had the big grand slam that propelled the Guardians past the Tigers into this ALCS in the first place. Was a guy that began the season on the Washington Nationals roster, and I can remember when he was late summer coming to St. Louis with the Nationals, and it just didn't seem like anything like this was in the near future for Lane Thomas, certainly, but the Guardians pick him up before the deadline, and he ends up coming through with one of the biggest swings of the Major League Baseball season, a grand slam in that Game 5 of the ALDS against Tarik Skubal, of all pitchers, who has just been unbelievable. He's going to be the American League Cy Young Award winner, we would have to think there. So pretty incredible stuff. I'm going to put him in left field. Thomas could play some center, could play some right, but I'm putting Harrison Bader in center field. Obviously, Harrison Bader, formerly of the New York Yankees, who are still in the mix. Right now, he is a New York Met and is participating on that postseason roster. Now, the Mets and Dodgers, as of this recording, tied 1 game apiece in the NLCS. That Game 3 will be coming on Wednesday night. Looking at the box scores for the first couple of games in the NLCS, Harrison Bader did not make a start in either of those games, but came into those games, I believe, defensively as a replacement later on, played some center field. So he's going to be the center fielder for us on this fantasy roster. 657 OPS this season for the Mets, so kind of somewhat in range with his career norms, and probably understanding why he might not be necessarily an everyday option for them in the NLCS in terms of the lineup. They'll probably play matchups, and we'll see if they get him in there. But certainly we know the defensive acumen of Harrison Bader, so he's going to be our center fielder for this exercise. And I'll put Tommy Pham. He's a former Cardinal and one that was on the team this year. I'll put him in right field. Probably might make sense, actually, to put Pham in left and Lane Thomas in right, but you could take your pick on the way that you want to approach that. Tommy Pham, of course, landing with the Royals after the Cardinals let him go. They basically knew that Tommy wanted to be on a postseason team or a team that had an opportunity to make the playoffs. The Cardinals were not trending in the right direction at that point in August, and so he ends up catching on with the Royals. The Royals, of course, beat the Orioles in that opening round series, but then the Royals were unable to get past the Yankees in the ALDS. But Tommy Pham, one of our outfielders here. And then I have another outfielder that I'm going to plug in as the designated hitter, and that is, of course, Marcell Ozuna. Became a Cardinal back when in a forgettable trade that sent Sandy Alcantara and Zach Gallen to the Miami Marlins. Yeah, that's not one that Cardinals fans remember fondly. And Marcell Ozuna was fine for the couple of years he spent in St. Louis, but had really turned himself into a nice slugger again for the Atlanta Braves in the years that he's spent with them. Maybe not everybody's favorite former Cardinal, but he is a former Cardinal, and as a DH, probably makes more sense. You remember his misadventures in left field at Busch Stadium. Yeah, we don't need him in the outfield defensively when you've got Lane Thomas, Harrison Bader, and Tommy Pham as options. I will have a couple of outfielders on my bench as well, and at least one of those benched outfielders did at least serve on the postseason roster for somebody, and that was one that I had to look up and go, oh yeah, I forgot he was even on that team. But I'll get to that in a minute. Let's go across the infield and give you some of those names. I'm sure you're not going to be too surprised by the majority of these. I'm going to put Tommy Edman at, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to put him at second base because I'm going to put Paul DeJong at shortstop. Maybe what the Cardinals should have done at the beginning of last season is switch that and put DeJong at second and Tommy Edman at shortstop. But I can recall when Paul DeJong came back from the injured list in 2023, he basically took over that shortstop duty, and Tommy Edman had a little bit of trouble at second base, honestly, defensively, after making the switch. Formerly a Gold Glove Award winner at second base, but I think they kind of did him dirty a little bit, switching his position midseason. Of course, that's something that they did another time later on in the year when they made Tommy Edman the center fielder, which actually kind of worked out. But nevertheless, however you want to apply it, you're going to have those two guys on your infield, as well as Edmundo Sosa, who I'm going to plug in at third base. Any of those three guys could really play any of those three spots, but in St. Louis, we mostly saw Paul DeJong at short. And so I decided, we'll throw Edmundo Sosa at third and Tommy Edman at second. You could switch that around in any order that you want, but those are probably going to be the infielders. Tommy Edman, of course, with the Dodgers at this point, potentially going to win a ring this year. Edmundo Sosa catching on and having a nice little career to this point with the Philadelphia Phillies. He was traded there in the Jojo Romero trade that brought the reliever to the Cardinals. So that ended up being a deal that I think you could say has worked out for both sides. And then, of course, Paul DeJong, longtime shortstop with the Cardinals. They traded him to Toronto, if memory serves, last season before the trade deadline. But he ends up getting kicked around, goes to the White Sox earlier this year, and then ends up with the Royals, as did Tommy Pham. So they were teammates during the postseason run for Kansas City. And DeJong not playing a ton for the Royals before they made their exit from the postseason, but on the roster. So that's a full infield except for first base. That's the one position that we have to stretch a little bit to get it done. We do still have somebody that qualifies as he did appear on a postseason roster, not just was on a team who made the postseason but not on the roster. No, Donovan Solano was on the postseason roster, but you might say Donovan Solano is not a former Cardinal. Technically, no, but he is a former Cardinal farmhand, and one from quite a number of years ago, as it's been a while since Donovan Solano was a Cardinal minor leaguer, and he's now 36 years old and has made his way around from Miami to New York Yankees to the Giants to the Reds to Minnesota to now with San Diego. He is a Padre, and back in 2005, he was a 17-year-old rookie baller for the Cardinals organization, was with the Cardinals from 2005 to, well, all the way up to 2011 when he made it to AAA that year. And then I believe he was non-tendered or was picked up by the Marlins on minor league waivers, whatever the case was. The Cardinals did not ever give him a chance in the big league, so he never did make a big league appearance for the Cardinals. But we're going to count him because he played a decent amount of first base for the Padres later this season, and we don't have a first baseman that I can spot anyway. And look, I dug through, and there were some other options of guys who were former Cardinals but did not appear on a postseason roster. At least Solano is on a postseason roster, so I decided that that would be the best spot to put him because first base is a position that he played this season. So that exhausts of our starting 9 in terms of the batting order. I didn't put him in a batting order, but this is like the lineup positionally. That's as far as we can get. I could not find a catcher. If I missed a catcher out there, let me know. But I am going to nominate. This is where I have to make a little bit of a change and nominate Carson Kelly because he was on the Tigers before the trade deadline, was traded away to the Rangers, and I believe ended up playing that series in St. Louis with the Rangers, if I can recall correctly. It was something to do with that. Either he was supposed to be here when the Tigers were, but got traded, and then you had Kisner that would have been here when the Tigers were, but got either DFA'd or sent down for Carson Kelly. It was something to that effect. I can't really remember. Nevertheless, Carson Kelly is who I'm going to plug in at catcher because we just don't have a catcher that was actually on a postseason roster and was a former Cardinal. So that's about as close as I can get. Hey, if the Tigers had won the World Series this year, Carson Kelly would have gotten a ring for that. So I'm going to count it. But that's the first concession that we've had to make. Kind of impressive that other than catcher, you have a starting 9 that you can file out there. And of course, we've got several starting pitchers that are going to be options. But before we get into the rotation and the bullpen that we'll be using for this roster, I'll give you the bench. There is one player, and maybe more. If I missed any throughout this exhaustive search, you guys let me know in the comments. One player who was on a postseason roster is a former Cardinal at the big league level, but I didn't plug him into the lineup because I just felt that was like I got to make a managerial decision. Jason Hayward actually ended up on the Astros and was on their postseason roster for the wild card series, and he's going to be on the bench. You could have put him in right field over Pham. Could see that argument. You could have, DH somebody. I would prefer Hayward's defense in the outfield. So I did at first have Tommy Pham at DH, and then I remembered, oh no, Marcell Ozuna is going to be in the lineup because he's probably one of the more prominent hitters at this stage to be able to mix that up. So Hayward does count, and he will go on the bench. But if you felt I should have put him in the lineup, well, you can let me have it in the comments. Elsewhere on this bench, I'm also going to include former Cardinal farmhand David Peralta, and this one is just a barely. And his story, if you know it, is an interesting one. Signed with the Cardinals as an international free agent all the way back in 2004 and began his professional career as a pitcher in the Dominican Summer League and then had a number of appearances in the Appalachian League. That's rookie ball back in the day in 2006, 2007. And I was looking at his game logs. I'm like, well, they only played in 3 games, 15 games, but that Baseball Reference doesn't really show it in what his minor league stats were necessarily because you have to scroll down to find his pitching stats. That's what he was doing back at the time. So he had a 5 ERA in 06 in 3 games in 9 innings, and then threw 52 innings in 07 as a 19-year-old in rookie ball. 5.81 ERA. He had to have, I think it was shoulder surgery, and then was rehabbing in 08. The Cardinals released him in 09, and then he came back as an outfielder, played for several years in independent baseball. Looks like, I'm checking out his Wikipedia page now to kind of refresh. Rio Grande Valley White Wings, the Wichita Wingnuts, and the Amarillo Sox. He was trying to spend all of those years making it as an outfielder, making that transition. And then in 2013, the D-backs signed him to a big league deal, and he worked his way through the minors as an outfielder. It was a long time before he was able to reach the big leagues. But David Peralta did exactly that and spent a long, long time with the Arizona D-backs. And then Tampa Bay Rays, Los Angeles Dodgers, and this year he was with the Padres as an outfielder. Pretty good hitter. He's had a pretty good big league career, but I don't think maybe I could have found another spot to put him. No, other than just the outfield spots in DH, he did pitch once in 2021. Kind of interesting. Like when you think about Ricky Ankiel, who transitioned from pitcher to outfielder, he never wanted to pitch again while he was playing outfield. Like those were two things that were just going to be separated for him. And then, of course, tried to eventually make a comeback as a pitcher in more recent years. Didn't end up working out. I think he got injured. But interesting that David Peralta, the former pitcher, actually did pitch once in 2021 for Arizona. But we're going to put him on the bench, and we're going to count him because, again, former Cardinal farmhand. So at this point, we're digging a little bit deeper for some of the position players to fill out the bench, but I think it's fair. Elsewhere on the bench, former Cardinal, he did play at the big league level. And again, these next 3 bench guys are all going to be, which I think is fair in terms of 9 starters, 4 bench guys. That would be 14. That might even be a little bit more, but we've got fewer pitchers than we need to fill out a 26-man roster. So I'm going to give you these 3. And look, there may have been another infielder or somebody random that I missed. let me know. I've got 3 more names to throw at you, 2 infielders and another catcher, a backup catcher. And if you can name the backup catcher now, here's the hint. He's been a guest on B-Schaeff Daily before. That is the hint. But we'll start here with Aledmys Diaz, who had like 4 at-bats with the Astros during this season and then was released. Did not play much for them, but he could play shortstop, could play third, could play second. And then Buddy Kennedy, who did not appear for the Cardinals, but was with them this offseason, was there in spring training before, if you recall, I think it was when they signed Brandon Crawford in spring. Buddy Kennedy was who kind of got axed as a result of that, which I like Buddy Kennedy. He was a good guy to talk to back in spring, and it was good to see him catch on a little bit in the regular season for the Tigers. And he also got run with another postseason team, the Phillies, and I think he's a Philly guy. He's from the same town as Mike Trout, is the whole deal there. And so it was kind of cool. I think he might have hit a big home run or had a big hit or something and was able to kind of celebrate that. Probably a lifelong dream playing out for Buddy Kennedy. So long way from Jupiter, Florida in February when I last saw him. But he could play some first, could play some second, could play some third. He's a nice little utility infielder to have on our bench. And then we do end up with a backup catcher, Joe Hudson, who appeared in 1 game for the Cardinals back in 2019, had 1 at-bat. He struck out. But Joe Hudson was the guy that was a guest at one point on B-Schaeff Daily. We talked about fantasy football. We talked about a number of things. You'd have to go back in the archives to, like, I think it was during COVID where I was like, what can I do with no games going on? Hey, I'll hit up Joe Hudson. And so that was that. But he ended up getting, this is kind of cool, and I'd like to maybe try to track him down and ask him about this experience. But Joe Hudson, who has been bouncing around between various minor league organizations, playing AAA for like 4 or 5 years since he was with the Cardinals. He got a chance in 2020 during the COVID season. I'm blanking on the team that it was the Mariners that he ended up playing some big league time with in 2020. But since then, he's gone from one AAA team to another, basically, before finally getting a big league opportunity, a brief one. But earlier this summer with the New York Mets, Joe Hudson actually was listed as their extra, their taxi squad guy that got to go to London. I'm pretty sure he did end up getting to go on that trip as like an emergency catcher in case somebody got hurt while they were over in London. They wouldn't have to go without a catcher or whatever. They had him there. And he wasn't on the roster, not the big league roster, but was on the taxi squad for that. And then ended up getting into a game later on in June, I think it was, against the Cubs. I think he spent some time in AAA with the Cubs this year as well. So Joe Hudson ended up appearing in a game for the Mets this year. Obviously, in the case of Diaz, Buddy Kennedy, and Joe Hudson, none of those guys were on MLB postseason rosters, but they were on teams that eventually made the postseason. Same thing for Carson Kelly. They played games for those teams this year, so I end up counting those guys as we expanded it out a little bit. But pretty good. I mean, we had basically 10 guys, because I think David Peralta was on the Padres postseason roster as well. Hayward was, and we had our 8 starters that were. And then Carson Kelly was not. So I think that's 10 that were, and then we just had to fudge it a little bit on the final 4 to get to a solid enough bench and have the catcher situation locked down. But we don't need to do any fudging when it comes to a playoff rotation. Jack Flaherty, Michael Wacha, Jose Quintana is your 1, 2, 3, and I think that team could win some games. Flaherty pitching a great game 1 for the Dodgers in this NLCS that's currently going on. Had, I think, 7 scoreless innings. Michael Wacha ended up being a nice fixture for the Royals this season and into the postseason. Started a couple of games for them. And Jose Quintana, of course, was with the Cardinals a couple of years ago, and he is part of that Mets rotation that is still kicking around in the playoffs right now against Jack Flaherty's Dodgers. So that's kind of fun. Those are 3 pretty good starters. That's maybe one of the strengths of the team, which might be frustrating for Cardinals fans because you're like, well, our rotation wasn't that great this year. But hey, it is what it is. And then we get into the bullpen, and the highlight of that is a guy that I put on the thumbnail of this video, and it's just unbelievable what Luke Weaver has become. Did anybody see this coming, that Luke Weaver, kind of quiet kid, starting pitcher, had a good personality, but was just didn't necessarily strike you as that guy with a killer instinct. Now he's screaming at people and shutting down games for the Yankees of all teams as their closer in the postseason. Kind of insane, the run that he is on right now. But yeah, they've turned Luke Weaver, who, bounced around for years and years and years. He ended up going to Arizona in the Goldschmidt trade originally and was a starter for them for a little bit. Spent some time with the Royals, the Reds, the Mariners, and then the Yankees pick him up. And instead of trying him as a starter this year, he ends up converting to the bullpen. It's kind of crazy how long he spent without really doing much relief pitching. Arizona eventually converted him to a reliever, but that was more out of just being a failed starter at that point. The Royals in 2022, I guess if they trade for him or whatever they did, he was in the bullpen for them for a little bit. And then last year, Cincinnati started him. Cardinals saw him a couple of times, and then goes to the Mariners and the Yankees within last season. And it wasn't until this year that the Yankees are like, all right, you're going to be a full-time reliever. And he's appeared in 62 games and was a nice middle reliever for them for the longest time. And then down the stretch, he's been incredible. He's been closing games for the New York Yankees. He might close the World Series. Luke Weaver. I mean, that's a possibility. He has a 2.89 ERA in the regular season this year, ended up pitching 84 innings, striking out 103 batters. So he's changed himself completely into an absolutely lethal relief pitcher, which is just unbelievable. I want to see if I can find some of the game logs to really ascertain exactly when this started to happen for Luke Weaver. His numbers have been great all season for the most part, but they ended up toward the end of it giving him more opportunities in the month of September. I don't think he had a save really prior to September. Picked up his first save on September 6th, but in September, he got kicked around a little bit in the first game of that month on the 2nd of September. But starting from the day he earned his first save, Luke Weaver was 11 innings, no runs allowed. No earned runs allowed. Allowed one unearned run, 24 strikeouts in 11 innings in September from the 6th to the 29th for Luke Weaver. Yeah, no wonder they made him the team's closer in the postseason. He's been incredible, just having a generational run. And then taking a look at his postseason stats, he did give up a run in the Game 2 win for the Yankees over the Guardians in this ALCS. But that's the only run he's given up in the playoffs. 7 innings, 1 run, 9 strikeouts, a 1.29 ERA. Just 2 months of pure dominance, really a month and a half of pure dominance by Luke Weaver. So he's your closer. Obviously, he was a former Cardinal. And then after that, Adam Ottavino was on the Mets NLDS roster, but not on the NLCS roster because they added Luis Angel Acuna, who is the brother of Ronald Acuna Jr., and kind of shifted their roster a little bit in that regard. So Ottavino was obviously a former Cardinal pitcher, and he's been around for a while as a pretty solid reliever. Got some closing experience at various stops along the way. But he was with the Mets, did have a spot on a postseason roster, just not the current one. So we're kind of working our way down. Ottavino would probably be the setup man, though, for this venture, I think. His numbers this year were not that strong. Maybe a guy that would be the setup man, if we could find him some health here, is Joe Kelly, who is not on the roster right now for the Dodgers. And I believe Dave Roberts, within the last couple of weeks, has said it's going to be World Series or bust for Joe Kelly. He had a shoulder injury, came back from it late in September. I think he re-injured it prior to the postseason, and so he has not been on these rosters. They said maybe could he be ready before the World Series or by the World Series if the Dodgers make it that far. Maybe. That's a possibility. So we'll throw Joe Kelly into that bullpen as well. And then probably the next most prominent guy would be Shelby Miller, who spent the majority of the year as a reliever for Detroit, but then was DFA'd toward the end of the season. Had a pretty good run for them at the beginning of the year. I think he was even closing some games, but does not end up on the Tigers postseason roster. He's not even on the team as he was DFA'd toward the end of the season, but he pitched in a ton of games this year. So we'll count him, and then we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel a little bit. We'll go John Brebbia next, who, believe it or not, got some run in Atlanta later in the season after starting with the White Sox. I did think for a time that he could end up on the Cardinals as part of the trades that were going down then. Didn't pitch great, but he was a Brave for a moment this season. And Nabil Crismatt, earlier in the season, was a Dodger and actually pitched pretty well for them at the beginning of the year. I was surprised when he had like a 2.5 ERA in a handful of games, and they DFA'd him or whatever the case was there. So that was a little bit surprising. And then one more name that you probably had no idea this guy was on a team, pitched this year in the big leagues for a team that was in the postseason. Matt Bowman ended up with a 4.40 ERA in 25 games for the Baltimore Orioles this season. That is information that either I didn't ever know it or I had forgotten it until I started looking up all of this for the little exercise that we're doing here. So 3 starting pitchers, all legit, all starting games in the postseason. Luke Weaver closing things out. He's our closer for this team. Those guys are all legit. That's 4. And then we had to get a little bit creative with Ottavino. Like, he was on a postseason roster, just not the NLCS roster for the Mets. And then even more creative with Joe Kelly because he's injured. Matt Bowman, Shelby Miller, John Brebbia, and Nabil Crismatt forming, how many do we have in that bullpen? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 3 starters. So a little bit light on the pitching side, but pretty good. We had more than a full allotment of position players again, stretching to guys that were part of those teams during the regular season, even if not in the postseason. And we did include some Cardinal farmhands as well to make sure we could get it done. But that's kind of fun. I'll wrap up with this. I want to find the best way that we could align this lineup for trying to actually be competitive with the names we got. So I'll go around the horn, and then I'll put them in order, and that'll wrap up the podcast. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. Just something fun, something offbeat to be able to pass the time here as we wait for real things to start happening again for the Cardinals. Carson Kelly, again, was the catcher that was a Tiger for a while, but they traded him. And that was the only fake that we had to do. Everything else in this lineup is real guys that were on those postseason rosters. And they were all real Cardinals, except for Donovan Solano, who never made it to the big leagues as a Cardinal, but spent a bunch of years with them in the minors. So Solano's our first baseman. Edman, we're going to put at second. Edmundo Sosa at third. DeYoung at short. Lane Thomas, I'm going to put in left. Bader in center. Tommy Pham in right. Marcell Ozuna is our DH. So let's see the best way that we could line this thing up. Probably want to get Lane Thomas in there a little bit early because he's actually performing right now in the postseason. Let's go Edman leadoff. Do I need to get into the right, left, right of it all though? I mean, Ollie Marmol might, have some appreciation for us being able to do that. No, we'll just kind of line it up the way that it maybe makes the most sense. We'll go Edman, Lane Thomas, then we'll go Marcell Ozuna. Ozuna's probably more of a three-hole guy though. We've got a lot of right-handers on this team, by the way. Nothing you can do about it. We'll put Marcell in the cleanup spot. And we'll actually shift Lane Thomas, grand slam hitter that he is, down into the three-hole. And we'll have Tommy Pham bat second. Get his energy up earlier in that lineup. I think that'll make some sense for our squad here. And then we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel just a little bit when it comes to some offensive performances from guys. I'm wondering, what did Donovan Solano actually do offensively this year? Yeah, I mean, he's got good numbers. He's got a 112 OPS plus, and a 760 OPS. So we'll definitely plug Solano into the 5-hole here. That seems like a good spot for him to go. He was above league average hitter this year, so you can't really argue with that. Paul DeYoung will plug into the 6th spot just to try to get a little bit of power there. Pretty boomer bust, but we think that's a pretty good maybe way to line that up. And then we'll find a spot for Harrison Bader down here toward the bottom. Do we want to go Harrison Bader 7th? Maybe we go Mundo 7th. We'll put Sosa 8th. Let's actually put Carson Kelly 8th, and we'll put Mundo 9th. He can be that double leadoff batter. So I don't know. I think that's kind of fun. Tommy Edman, Tommy Pham, Lane Thomas, Marcell Ozuna, Donovan Solano, Paul DeYoung, Harrison Bader, Carson Kelly, Edmundo Sosa, with a rotation of Flaherty, Waka, Quintana, and Luke Weaver closing out games for us. I don't know how many games this team would win, but the fact that all these former Cardinals are on postseason rosters, kind of cool to see for them. So let me know what you thought of this episode. If you have any other thoughts as we went through this exercise of elements of this that I did not bring up, make sure you do it. Appreciate you guys for checking out the video, for checking out the channel. Subscribe for more Cardinals content and St. Louis sports content throughout the offseason. Thank you guys so much for being here, as always, and supporting the show. Check out Underdog Fantasy. The promo code, again, b-schaeff, is in the video description right here below. Thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.